Do you really think Hamas is going to release all of our hostages? That's the only leverage they have preventing us from annihilating them.
Welcome to a new episode of Shaun and Ari Discuss Israel, now hosted at the JNS studio in Jerusalem. Ari, how are you?
I'm great, Shaun. How are you doing?
Very good, and it's good to see you face to face.
It's nice that everyone else can see us as well.
It is. So, Ari, what are we going to be discussing on today's episode?
Today we're going to be talking about the renewed offensive in Gaza and the big debate that's going on in Israel right now, where it pits on one side the victory over Hamas against the return of all the hostages. And I think before we even get into the episode, I think we need to touch on the breaking news at the moment of the release of Idan Alexander from Hamas captivity.
So that's important because a lot of the information we're going to be talking about is changing as we're having this discussion. Because initially we thought about our discussion revolving around the highly emotional issue of the release of hostages and possibly in addition to the defeat of Hamas. But at the same time, we're now looking at a potential renewed offensive and the possibility of a ceasefire with a new hostage deal. All of those things are happening right now.
Right. So I think before we even open up any of those things, we have to just touch a little bit on the breaking news of Idan Alexander, like I said, and let's delve into the current reality of on-the-ground happenings in Gaza. So I'll talk about Gaza, but beforehand, do you want to give us just an update on the Idan Alexander and hostage release situation?
Right. So it's actually happening right now as we're recording this episode. Idan Alexander, an IDF soldier with American citizenship, is being released from Hamas captivity and is going to be flown to Doha in Qatar, where he will officially have a handing over ceremony. His parents are already there. More than that, as of now, we don't really know. But this is also setting the tone for potential new hostage negotiations, which will change a lot of the equations that the IDF is preparing for right now as well.
Right. So now let's talk about what the IDF is doing to prepare for any of those situations. So in Gaza right now, we've had over the last week to 10 days, there's been a large reservist call-up of tens of thousands of soldiers in preparation for a renewed offensive in Gaza. Now, the reservists being called up are replacing a lot of the regular army from their operations and missions along the northern border in Judea and Samaria and elsewhere to give them time also to take a break, because just as the reservists are starting to get burnt out a little bit, the regular army has been working on overdrive for a year and a half now. So they also need a little bit of a break. And they're preparing on the ground. There's small offensives already happening in Gaza to prepare more of a tactical or logistical reality to make a larger offensive more practical, I think would be the right word, or easier to execute from a stronger position in the field to begin with. At the moment, as we just said, Trump is in the region. He's in Saudi Arabia or Qatar at the moment, and he's expected to be here for another couple of days. And I believe that out of respect for the American president, the Israeli government isn't going to launch any major offensive until after he's returned to the United States and exhausted any discussions or negotiations that he's leading in the region, and to see the outcome of those. That being said, there is a lot that's going to be happening, and it brings us back to the domestic debate that's going on now here in Israel. Like you said, a highly emotional debate. If a renewed offensive in Gaza is the answer to the question, or should we be making a deal with Hamas and capitulating to them and handing them the keys to the kingdom in return for all our hostages? But before we go there, let's look a little bit historically about what every agreement we've ever made with Hamas has looked like from our end.
So I need to make 2 points. The first is, are we talking about a renewed offensive and returning hostages? Or are we saying a renewed offensive and the return of the hostages? Is it an and or? Because that is unfortunately where much of Israeli society is now debating. We want both of those things, and they both seem to be contradictory. But I want to go back and discuss, not only are these things contradictory, in my opinion, almost subconsciously, Israelis and the various Israeli governments have been lying to ourselves about what we want in Gaza. And we can go all the way back to the disengagement plan of 2005, where most Israelis actually believed somewhere that if we disengage militarily from Gaza, remove all our communities, remove all our settlements, we would be removed from any future endeavors in Gaza, and we would have international legitimacy if violence came out from Gaza. But what happened? Less than a year after the pullout, 2006, Gilad Shalit was captured by Hamas soldiers. This was also during the Second Lebanon War. And anything that happened after this, Israel didn't really have any legitimacy for a major military operation. And this carried on until 2009, where after hundreds, if not thousands, of Hamas missiles, Israel launched its first major operation into Gaza. And very quickly, we realized we did not have international legitimacy to carry out this operation. The operation stalled relatively quickly, but there was a ceasefire, and we were under the impression, both from a government level and also Israeli public, it's okay. We have sufficiently deterred Hamas. This is it. There will be no more future rounds of conflict. And even if there is, because we've signed a ceasefire and Hamas is deterred, we will have international legitimacy for a future military operation. And then,
will we?
And then in 2012, after more rockets, we began an aerial campaign against Hamas leaders that ended in a ceasefire. And we said, no, this time Hamas is deterred, and the international community understands that any future operation, Israel is fully within their rights to attack Gaza. And then in 2014...
Let me guess. The world wasn't on our side again.
Well, not only that, 2014, 3 Israelis were kidnapped in the West Bank, in the Yehuda and Shomron area. This led to rockets and eventually a full-scale invasion of Gaza by the IDF and a month-long war that Israel was berated for at every international organization, from the UN to the beginning of the International Criminal Court. And international legitimacy completely dried up. But it ended with a ceasefire. And it was understood that now Hamas is sufficiently deterred. There is a ceasefire. And we now have the ability to withhold any future Hamas invasion. And while all this was going on, there were constant negotiations over hostage release. The most infamous, the most famous was the release of Gilad Shalit for 1,000 Hamas terrorists, including Yahya Sinwar himself. And the argument given to the Israeli public that we all believed was, it doesn't matter if 1,000 Hamas terrorists are released. The IDF and the Israeli security apparatus has the ability to prevent any major operation that can actually threaten Israeli communities.
Yeah,
now
we saw how well that worked out.
Now on the eve of now after October 7th, we see the IDF, with all due respect to the military that we both serve in still proudly, the IDF, the Shabak, and the entire security apparatus failed to prevent an invasion of Israel by Hamas. We have very limited international legitimacy, now almost none at all. And Hamas, at the moment, appears like they're going to remain in Gaza indefinitely. At the same time, we are desperate to return our hostages, both alive and dead.
So I think that desperation has led to the reality in Israel where they say, well, we've been living with Hamas for so long. It's a reality that we've come to accept. You know, having a couple of dead Jews every couple of years is acceptable for us as a nation. Internationally, that's what's expected of us, to, you know, bow our heads and be the weak Jew instead of the strong Jew. And we've become accepted. We're willing to accept that our enemies keep not just their own motivation, because we're never going to defeat that, but they maintain their ability to cause us harm in return for the hostages that are remaining in Gaza at the moment. And that's an acceptable equation for a large chunk of the Israeli population at the moment. And that's being presented as an either or. It's either we defeat Hamas and are victorious in Gaza, or we capitulate to Hamas and get our hostages back. It doesn't seem like anyone's speaking about a third option.
So what is the third option? If we've already said it appears to be an either or. Either we're going to defeat Hamas, or we're going to get our hostages back. What is this third option?
So I think that you made it clearly that there's really there is three options. There's option one, like you said, we'll repeat again, just we capitulate to Hamas, we give them everything they want, and we get our hostages back. I think the one major flaw with that reasoning is that Hamas is never going to give back all of the hostages. They know that the second they give back all the hostages, there's nothing stopping us from defeating them, from killing all of them. The hostages are their insurance policy. Anyone who believes that they're going to give back everyone, they're lying to themselves, they're lying to the public. It's just not a reality. They can't do that. There's no deal that exists that's a reality. So let's say we get back everyone except one or two, and we're willing to let them stay there indefinitely in return for the rest, which is what people are arguing about now. How can we trade one hostage who happens to have American citizenship for the rest? Because the reality is we're not getting all of them in a deal. Hamas can never sign that deal. And then option two is let's just go in there, violently just kill and destroy everything. If we find hostages, great. And if not, not. And I think that there's a middle ground. There's a middle ground of those two options. It's a different reality.
Okay, so let's be very realistic at the moment. Most of us in Israel realize the pitfalls of both options, but we do want both. We want all the hostages back, even though we know it is almost impossible. We also want to defeat Hamas, even though we know a military victory over Hamas, even if it becomes plausible, will risk the lives of the hostages and any potential deal. So what is this third option, and what is this mid-ground that you're talking about?
Well, the third option doesn't mitigate the risk to the hostages. It just accepts reality. It puts us in a position of, instead of being like children that just want lots of things, it forces us to be adults and take responsibility, where we have to decide what our priorities are. Are our priorities the lives of 24 hostages and the safe and, honorable burial of 34? Or is our highest priority and responsibility to the 9 million or 10 million citizens of the state of Israel and Jews all around the world at this point? What's our number one priority? And we have to accept responsibility for what it is that we want out of Gaza. If we just want our hostages out and Hamas gone, we can achieve that through negotiations in some fantasy land, maybe. But in reality, that's not if that's what we want, then we're leaving our enemies on our borders with all of the motivation and the ability to inflict harm on us moving forward. So the way I see it is that there is a third option. I'm very highly inspired by the position paper put out by the IDSF, the Israel Defense and Security Forum, led by Lieutenant General Amir Avivi, where they lay out their plan for their vision as former heads of the military, vision of what could be in Gaza if we just want it to be. He talks about it in about 3 stages. I agree with most of what he writes, but to lay the plan out very simply, there's a massive military operation that lasts a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months, depending on how smoothly everything runs. It'll be the largest military operation in Israel history. It would require 5 full divisions, which is what we've seen starting to happen now with the current reserve call-ups, where it means 5 divisions operating simultaneously in 5 different sectors in Gaza all at the same time. Now we operate in the north, so all the Hamas terrorists can run away to the south. Then we operate in the south, they can run back to the north, and vice versa, going on and on for 18 months. Operate everywhere simultaneously all at the same time. You set up safe zones or humanitarian areas that are completely controlled by the IDF, where civilians can go get screened, get biometric ID so we know who's there, where they are, who they are, how they're connected to, start rebuilding our intelligence infrastructure in Gaza, transfer population back and forth from one position, and literally go and clean the entire Gaza Strip from end to end, remove all of the war material that's there, all the explosive, all the guns. Will we get 100% of everything? Highly unlikely. Will we get 90+%? Probably. And at the same time, we'll find whatever hostages we find. We'll recover whatever bodies we can recover at the same time. And over time, we'll build up the intelligence to be able to find who we're missing, or at least know where to look. But we'll have full operational control. After you accomplish all of that, which will take time and cost probably many more lives than we've already lost, we'll then be able to decide moving forward, how much further do we want to go? Do we then want to now have a full military government in Gaza like we had in 1967? And that worked really well up until Oslo. My uncle will tell me stories from the 70s when he was a soldier in Gaza of going and getting coffee and falafel in Rafiah and Khan Yunis with the other soldiers with him without having to worry about anything bad happening to them, we could return to those days potentially. It'll probably take a generation or two. We could theoretically return to there, setting a military government where we, the Israeli people, have responsibility for what goes on in Gaza. Everything. Where we are the ruling power. Where the Gazans understand that we are the ruling power and not anyone of their own liking. And moving forward, could we then speak about local autonomous regions like in the Emirates that exist, like places in small, tiny city-states in Europe, like the Vatican, like Montenegro, like areas like that, like Puerto Rico in the US, start setting up small islands of autonomy after a full generation goes by and we understand and we control their education. That's what I think, but that requires us to be adults and take responsibility and think not about today or tomorrow and what makes me feel good and what I want, but to think about what we need to do to ensure the safety and security of our people for 50 years into the future, 100 years into the future, so that my son and your son are not fighting the same battles in the same places that you and I have been fighting for the past 20 years.
Okay, I appreciate everything you're saying, but I do have significant disagreements. And I mean this with all respect to the generals who've come up with these.
Yeah, well, if we didn't disagree, then this wouldn't be very much fun, would it?
Right. So the first is how you ended. We discussed this before. We all want our children to inherit, hopefully, our bank accounts that will be more positive. We want them to inherit a good education. We don't want our children to inherit the exact same wars that we fought. But that, unfortunately, appears to be on the horizon no matter what. But in addition to what we want to inherit in the future, what we want our children to inherit in the future, the idea that Israel can now simultaneously have 5 full divisions operating. That's infantry, that's tanks, that's artillery, that's committing almost the entire Israeli Air Force from fighter jets to helicopters. It's a massive logistical nightmare that at the moment, I don't think the current IDF is fully equipped to deal with. And I don't think our civilian infrastructure is ready to deal with that type of mass long deployment. That's the first thing. The second is not only what's going to happen if this is achieved, is what is the goal with regards to the Gaza population long term? Now, the way I see it, it's vital that whether it's the current generation of Gaza's population in the future, I really believe that for a long time to come, they will always have the motivation to cause harm to the state of Israel and its citizens. The most important military action that we can carry out is to remove their ability to act on their desire to cause us harm. That needs to be the primary military goal. But goes back to what I said before. I don't know if right now we have the logistics to carry out a full military operation across Gaza. After that has been achieved, even if we are able to do it, the problem I'm seeing is there is a pipe dream idea that somehow the Gaza Strip can be turned into an enclave with these islands of financial prosperity. That has not happened anywhere in our region, and I don't see it being a reality because there are too many aspects of issues on the ground, from different tribal alliances, a lot of weaponry, and massive destruction that is being caused and will be caused. That makes any type of financial viability in a future Gaza almost impossible. And 2 more points. The second is the cost, the emotional cost that this will take on Israel, not just having huge amounts of reservists, but also we will tacitly have to say some hostages may be sacrificed. Nobody is willing to acknowledge that. Nobody is willing to say that, and nobody in Israel will ever be willing to accept that. And the last point is everybody who's speaking about a major Gaza operation, including President Trump, and with all due respect to him, there's this idea that somehow large elements within the Gaza population can be relocated elsewhere. That is, in my opinion, complete fallacy. Not only do people not understand the amount of resources that are needed to transfer hundreds of thousands of people by plane is a resource-heavy task that does not exist in Israel at the moment. The second and most important part of this is no country in the world, whether it is the United Kingdom or anywhere else in Europe or South Africa, no country in the world will willingly take hundreds of thousands or even thousands of Palestinians coming from Gaza. So that idea, even though it is spoken about, is a non-starter.
All right. So now you gave me a lot to respond to. I'm going to do it in a completely different order than you presented in. I think one, I'm going to start with your first point, though, because that's the easiest one. Whether Israel is even capable of launching a 5-divisional assault on Gaza at the moment and the logistical nightmare that is, I think that the reality is that we had closer to 10 or 12 divisions called up on October 7th with no warning, no preparation, and the total logistical nightmare that was, it still worked out overall pretty good. So to say we can't handle calling up 5 divisions that have been pre-planned, prepared for, and organized, I think that's, with all due respect to the failures of the upper echelons of the army and the security apparatus on October 7th, I think on that level of the army, there were exemplarily successful. And that was with no pre-planning, with no preparations, and logistics of the army today are in considerably better shape than they were on October 7th, due to the fact that we've been at war for a year and a half, and we've only been improving. I don't know anywhere in the army that is worse off now than they were a year and a half ago. So I think that is the easy one to answer. Now I'll get to your last point, which is a hard one to answer, is the Trump or Netanyahu plan to shift and immigrate as many Gazans as possible out of the region to far-flung places and all that. My answer is I don't know. Whether it's feasibly, logistically at the moment to transfer 100,000 people to some faraway island in the Far East, it's not going to happen overnight. Can it happen? I mean, we've pulled off crazier things as a country and more complicated things than that. It's not that hard. Is it going to be done overnight? I don't think anyone expected the entire Gazan population to be moved in 48 hours. I think it's a process that can take years. And it can be done and populations can be moved around the world. I also think there's neighboring countries that require buses and trucks and not airplanes to get to that have the moral requirement, I would believe, to accept the refugees, at least to some extent, where they'd feel at home. To respond to your point about the hostages and why no one's willing to say it out loud, I think it shows a lack of leadership. Real leaders don't get led by people's emotions, but lead people to where they need to be. Do I think that anyone wants to leave people behind? But as we saw yesterday, where we returned the body of Tzvi Feldman, 40 years later now? It's 40 years later, we had a clandestine operation by the Mossad in the outskirts of Damascus to return a body 40 years later. Do I think that anyone is ever going to get left behind? No. We will always go to the ends of the world to find everyone and bring them home. That's who we are as Jews. That's who we are as a people. And that is the agreement that every soldier has when they go off to war. We will do everything to bring you home. Even if it takes 40 years, you will be brought home. The reality is that anyone who promises 100% success, they're also lying to everybody. But it's easier to accept that lie than accept the reality that that's not possible.
Okay.
And I'm sure you made other points that I missed, but now...
No, it's okay. So I hear what you're saying.
I think that's where we're going. But one second, I do want to say one other point on that is I think that if we have to look at things, we have to stop as a people, we have to stop looking about right now and me, not like peace now or, retreat now, or I want everyone bring them home now, or all the things. We have to stop thinking about right now and what I want and think about what we need and think about the long term. True leadership leads the people to where they need to go and not to what they want. And you have a great quote that you quote with Golda Meir, Ben Gurion, right? There's the famous Ben Gurion quote which is you'll say because I always mess it up. But
So there's a quote about that Ben Gurion apparently said this relatively often when he made very controversial statement when Ben Gurion made very controversial decisions. His answer was, "I know what the people need. I'm not interested in what they want." But on that subject of leadership, if there is the potential for a major military operation in Gaza that can defeat Hamas, as we've spoken about, why hasn't it happened yet?
why hasn't it happened yet? That's a great question. But I think it goes back to the point I was just making. We're currently in the state of Israel lacking leadership. We have leaders. We don't have leadership. They're lacking a clarity of vision. They're lacking a clarity of understanding the reality that they're in and the opportunity that's at their doorstep. Because accepting that decision and making it requires taking responsibility, because it's either going to be the greatest success in Israel's history or a colossal failure. It's going to be one or the other. And it's being willing to make the decision and accept responsibility for your actions that we're currently lacking at every level, at every senior level, whether it's political, judicial, legislative, military. All of our leadership right now are people that are there as, second choices, or have been there forever, or are looking out to protect their own little piece. There's no one there who sees themselves as the leader of the Jewish people, who can and should be leading us to where we need to be. And I think that because there's lacking leadership, there's lacking decision-making. And because there's lacking decision-making, we're just treading water, because that is much easier. That's the ability of not making a decision.
Well, I think that issue of leadership is really important, and we will definitely touch on the leadership challenges to Israel, both at a government level and opposition level, in a future episode. But for now, I think we'll be signing off. Thank you to JNS for hosting us for this podcast, and we look forward to being back together next week.